I'm Dr. Richard Lawson. I've been a vascular surgeon for, well, let's just say, longer than a lot of the younger staff in the ER have been alive. Over 35 years now, I've stood in more operating rooms than I can count, at every hour of the day and night. You know, you think after a while, things stop surprising you. You think you've seen it all. The truth is, you never really do. There are days, certain days, that stay with you, burned in your memory no matter how many decades pass. And tonight, well, I want to tell you about one of those days. A night, actually, mid-90s. Cold outside, typical Chicago evening, the kind where the wind cuts right through your coat. I was finishing up a long shift, one of those where you'd already done 2 major cases, barely had time for a sandwich, and you're thinking maybe, just maybe, you'll get a couple hours of sleep. But the pager went off, and when you hear ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, you move fast, no matter how tired you are, because minutes matter. And this was one of those cases, the kind that tests you, no matter how many years you've been doing this, the kind that still puts a knot in your stomach. I'll be honest, it was an operation I didn't want to do that night, not because of the work, but because of what was on the line, and because I knew the odds. And then, something happened in that that I will never forget as long as I live. To this day, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the monitors, feel that sterile cold of the room, see the look on the anesthesiologist's face when it happened. You'll see what I mean. And by the way, if you're into real stories from inside the OR, things that go beyond what you see on TV, go ahead, hit that like button, maybe subscribe. I've got a few more tales that might just surprise you. And hey, if you've ever had an experience where life hit you with something you didn't expect, drop a comment below. I read them all. But back to that night. The patient, mid-50s, man brought in by EMS, BP dropping fast. The skin showed a ticking time bomb in his abdomen. I remember thinking, this could go either way. And the young resident on my team, it was his first time assisting on something this critical. You could see it in his eyes, that mix of adrenaline and fear. We prepped fast. Every minute counted. I could feel that old familiar weight on my shoulders, the kind that never really leaves you in this line of work. You're about to open someone up, and you know, this is life or death. There's no guarantee. And sometimes, things happen in that or that even decades of experience don't prepare you for. That night was one of those times. I never set out thinking I'd become a vascular surgeon. Back in med school, I was drawn more to cardiology at first. The heart fascinated me. But somewhere during my rotations, the vascular side pulled me in. There's something about the immediacy of it, about working with vessels, blood flow, the very highways of life inside a person. And to be honest, back then, the idea of being in the OR, sleeves rolled up, right in the thick of it, it scared me. But it also drew me in. I guess that's how you know you're in the right place. If it didn't scare you at least a little, well, you'd probably be in the wrong line of work. I trained in Chicago, Old Hospital, one of those big public centers where you saw everything, the worst traumas, the hardest cases. There was no cherry picking. If someone rolled through those doors with a ruptured aneurysm or a crushed pelvis, that was coming to us. And when you work in a place like that, day after day, it changes you. You learn fast, or you don't last. I had good mentors, tough ones. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They taught us that surgery isn't about heroics, it's about discipline, skill, keeping a clear head when the room is spinning. By the time this story happened, I'd been in the field for over 15 years. I was 40-something, already considered one of the more senior surgeons in the department. Younger staff would sometimes come to me for advice. "Dr. Lawson, how do you stay so calm in the OR?" They'd ask. Truth is, you're never truly calm. You just learn how to manage what's going on inside. Keep your voice steady, your hands steady, no matter what your gut is telling you. Outside of the hospital, I kept things pretty simple. Chicago was home. Busy city, fast pace. My wife always joked that I had 2 speeds, in surgery and asleep. Not far from the truth. There's a rhythm to life when you work in a place like that. Days blend into nights. Birthdays, holidays, sometimes you miss them. But you also see life at its rawest, people fighting to live, families hoping for miracles. That teaches you a kind of respect for life, for the team around you, and for the weight of what we do. I wasn't the loud type. No speeches in the OR. No need to bark orders. My team knew when things got tough, we kept our heads down and did the work. I always believed that steadiness was more important than theatrics, especially when younger staff were watching. You had to model what you wanted them to become. Medicine's not about one person. It's about trust, teamwork, precision, and sometimes it's about walking into that or knowing that no matter how long you've been doing this, tonight might test you all over again. And that night, that cold night in the 90s, it did exactly that. It was late, around 10 o'clock at night. I remember because I had just sat down in the call room with a cup of coffee, one of those burnt, stale pots that had probably been sitting there since noon. The hospital was quieting down, that strange stillness that settles in after visiting hours are over, the halls dim, nurses moving quietly from room to room. It had already been a long day. I'd done 2 major procedures back to back, barely had time for a bite to eat. My legs were tired, my shoulders sore, the usual for days like that. I wasn't expecting another call. Then the pager went off. Those old pagers, loud, shrill, the kind of sound that jolts you upright no matter how tired you are. I looked at the message, ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, ETA 10 minutes, ER level 1. I remember muttering to myself, of course, because in this field, that's how it happens. You can't plan for it. When it comes, it comes. In this was one of the bad ones. I grabbed my coat and headed for the OR. On the way, I ran into Mark, my anesthesiology colleague. Mark and I had worked together for years. Solid guy, no nonsense. The kind of partner you wanted when things got rough. He just looked at me and said, "You saw the page?" I nodded. "It's gonna be close," he said. We both knew what that meant. A ruptured aneurysm, you're racing the clock. Sometimes you lose before you even start. In the scrub room, my resident, Dan, was already there. 3rd year. Young, eager, good hands, but this would be his first time assisting on a rupture. I could see that nervous energy in him. He looked up and said, "Dr. Lawson, what are we looking at?" I kept it simple. "It's bad. Be ready. No need for more." He understood. You learn fast in these situations. Also in the room was Emily, a young intern, 1st year. She'd asked earlier that month if she could observe on a vascular case. Well, sometimes you get more than you ask for. I glanced at her. She looked calm, but her eyes were wide. I made a mental note to keep an eye on her during the procedure. These cases, they can shake even seasoned staff. As we prepped, the ER team rolled in the patient, a man in his early 50s, pale, diaphoretic, blood pressure barely holding. You could feel the tension in the air. Everyone moved quickly, quietly. This wasn't the time for chatter. I asked for the latest labs and imaging. The CT showed a large aneurysm already leaking. We didn't have much time. Mark leaned over and whispered, "We've got a narrow window here." I nodded. "Let's move." The ER team sprang into action. Scrub nurses setting up trays, perfusionist on standby. It was one of those moments where everything else falls away. The only thing that matters is the patient on the table and what you're about to do. And standing there as we started to prep, I'll admit it, even after all those years, I felt that old familiar weight settle in. The stakes were high, the odds were slim, and deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a routine night. Once we got the patient prepped and opened up, the real challenge began. I won't sugarcoat it. Ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysms are among the most brutal cases you face in vascular surgery. You're fighting against time, blood loss, and the patient's own fragile condition. At first, everything seemed manageable. The team was sharp, moving with precision. I could feel the rhythm we all know, that dance in the OR where every move counts. But then, as I started to clamp and expose the aneurysm, things shifted. The bleeding was worse than the scan suggested. Much worse. The aneurysm had torn more extensively than we anticipated. Blood was pooling rapidly in the retroperitoneal space, and the patient's blood pressure was plummeting fast. That sinking feeling hit me, you know the one, when you realize this case is slipping out of your control. The anesthesiologist's voice over the monitor was tense but calm, BP's dropping. We're losing him. That's when every second feels like an hour, and every decision wastes tons. We had to act fast. The dilemma was brutal. Do we push harder, risk more aggressive maneuvers, or try a different approach that might buy us time but came with its own dangers? My mind raced. I glanced at Dan, the resident. His hands were steady, but I could see the sweat on his brow. I told him to focus on the clamps and stay ready for anything. Emily, the intern, was wide-eyed but quiet, absorbing everything. We were a team, but the pressure was crushing. My heart was pounding. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, because I knew that in those moments, one slip could cost this man his life. I reminded myself, breathe, stay calm, trust your training. But honestly, it was one of the hardest nights I've ever faced. The line between success and failure was razor thin. The bleeding wouldn't slow, the clock was ticking, and the room felt like it was closing in. This was no longer just a routine procedure. This was a battle where every breath, every heartbeat was a fight. And then something happened that changed everything. That moment in the OR, man, it was something else. Everything was on a knife's edge. The bleeding was relentless, the patient's vitals swinging like a pendulum. You could feel the tension in the room tighten with every passing second. I remember standing there, hands deep inside, trying to control what felt like an impossible situation. And then it happened. The patient suddenly started to show signs of coming out of anesthesia. Right there, on the operating table. It was like a punch to the gut. 1 second, we're focused on the repair. The next, his eyes fluttered open, and he tried to move. My heart nearly stopped. To be honest, I was shocked. I hadn't seen that happen in decades, a patient waking mid-op. It's one of those terrifying, surreal moments that shakes you to your core. You think about all the checks you've done, the protocols, the anesthesia team's work. Yet somehow, here he was, conscious in the middle of an emergency surgery. The room fell silent for a split second, then chaos kicked in. I had to keep talking to him, calm his confusion, while the team scrambled to stabilize everything. Mark, my anesthesiologist, was on his game, quickly adjusting meds, but the risk was real. We couldn't let him move too much. Every motion risked rupturing the vessel further, undoing all we'd worked for. I still get chills thinking about those minutes. The tension was suffocating, but the team never lost focus. I remember locking eyes with Dan, my resident, his face pale but determined, and telling him, "Stay sharp. This is what surgery is really about." That night taught me something I'd never forget. No matter how many years you have, how many cases you've done, medicine can throw you curveballs that test every ounce of your skill and composure. But that's also what makes this work so real, so human, because at the end of the day, we're not just fixing blood vessels or organs, we're fighting for a person's life in all its messy, unpredictable glory. And despite the fear, the adrenaline, the moments you want to freeze or run away from, you keep going. You have to, because that patient, right there on the table, he's counting on you, and that's a responsibility like no other. After those intense, heart-pounding moments, the OR finally settled into a rhythm. We managed to regain control of the bleeding, carefully repairing the torn sections of the abdominal aorta. It wasn't easy. Every step had to be precise, every move deliberate. The patient's vitals slowly stabilized, and the anesthesia team kept a close watch, making sure he stayed unconscious this time. I remember the relief that washed over me when I saw his blood pressure finally holding steady. The team exhaled, though there was no time for celebration yet. We still had to close up and ensure everything was secure. Dan, my resident, worked alongside me with a focus that impressed me. Despite the earlier shock, he didn't lose his nerve. Emily, the intern, stayed close, absorbing every detail, probably understanding more about the real stakes of surgery than any textbook could teach her. When we finished, I stepped back for a moment and looked around the room. The exhaustion was written on everyone's faces, but so was that unmistakable sense of accomplishment. We'd pulled off what, minutes before, had seemed nearly impossible. The patient was wheeled to the ICU for close monitoring. I stayed to update his family, who were understandably terrified but grateful. I still remember their faces, a mixture of hope and raw emotion. That day reminded me why we do what we do, why every long shift, every stressful moment is worth it. For the people depending on us, for the chance to give someone more time with their loved ones. That experience changed how I view every operation. It taught me humility, that even with decades of practice, you can't predict everything, but you can rely on your training, your team, and your resolve. It's not about being fearless, it's about facing fear head-on and pushing through it. Years later, that night still stays with me. It's a reminder that medicine is as much about courage as it is about skill, and that every patient we treat carries a story, a family, a life that matters deeply. Looking back, I'm proud of how we handled that case, but more than that, I'm grateful. Grateful for my colleagues, for the trust patients place in us, and for the chance to make a difference, even in the toughest moments. So, that's how it ended. A fight, a win, and a lesson that never fades. And I want to ask you this. When was the last time you faced a challenge that pushed you to your limits? How did you respond? Drop your thoughts below. I'm curious to hear. Because in the end, it's these moments that shape us all. That night didn't just end when the OR lights went off. For me, it stayed with me for days, even weeks. I remember driving home after the shift, the city lights of Chicago blurring past, but my mind was stuck back in that room. The beeping monitors, the tension, the patient's sudden awakening. It's funny how these moments don't just fade away. They settle in, nestle deep inside, and make you rethink a lot of things. To be honest, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion, but also a kind of quiet pride. Not the kind that's loud or boastful, just the steady pride of knowing that, despite everything, we managed to pull through. But it also reminded me how fragile life is, how no matter how much experience you have, how many operations you perform, you're always one step away from chaos. That realization humbled me in a good way. I started paying even more attention to the little things, the subtle signs in patients, the way my team communicated in the OR, the importance of every second we have with someone on that table. It reinforced why this job requires more than just skill. It demands heart, patience, and respect for every life you touch. And, it also made me appreciate the people I work with even more, the anesthesiologists, the nurses, the residents who are still learning. Because in moments like that, you rely on them just as much as they rely on you. That case changed how I see surgery. It's not routine. It's not just another day at work. It's a constant challenge, a responsibility that never lightens. And even after 35 years, I still get that rush, that pressure, that fear mixed with determination. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, but I also get a deep sense of purpose. It's why I keep doing this, because at the end of the day, it's about people, about fighting for their lives when it matters most. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. Looking back on that night, the biggest lesson I took away wasn't about the surgery itself, it was about the human side of medicine. You see, after more than 3 decades in the OR, you realize that no amount of experience can erase the weight of responsibility you carry every time you step into that room. What I learned is that fear and doubt don't disappear. They don't vanish just because you've done hundreds of cases. Instead, you learn to acknowledge them, manage them, and use them to stay sharp. That night reminded me that being a surgeon isn't about being fearless. It's about having the courage to face your fears, to keep going when everything feels like it's against you. It taught me to respect the unpredictability of life and medicine, to never take any case for granted, no matter how routine it might seem. And it reinforced something else, something just as important, the power of teamwork and trust. You can't do this job alone. Every person in that, or from the anesthesiologist to the nurses to the residents, plays a vital role. That collective effort, that shared focus, is what saves lives. I carry that lesson with me every day. It shapes how I approach every patient, every procedure, every challenge. And honestly, it's what keeps me grounded. Because at the end of the day, we're not just fixing bodies, we're dealing with people's hopes, fears, and futures. That's a responsibility I never take lightly. And that's a truth I hope anyone watching this can take with them, no matter what field they're in. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. After that night, the story kind of took on a life of its own within the hospital. Among the team, it became one of those moments everyone talked about, not in a boastful way, but as a reminder of how unpredictable surgery can be. The fact that the patient woke up mid-operation was almost unbelievable, and yet it happened. I remember colleagues joking, half seriously, that it was a once-in-a-career kind of case, and I guess it was. Over the years, I rarely saw anything quite like it. It was a reminder for all of us that no matter how much you prepare, medicine has a way of surprising you. For me personally, that night changed how I approached every case afterward. I became even more meticulous, not because I doubted my skills, but because I realized how fragile the balance is in the OR. It pushed me to be more attentive, more communicative with my team, and more mindful of the patient's whole experience, not just the technical side of surgery. I also took on a bit of a mentoring role after that. I'd share the story with younger surgeons and residents, not to scare them, but to prepare them, to help them understand that fear, doubt, and unexpected challenges are part of the job, and that how you respond to them defines you as a surgeon and as a person. That story also deepened my respect for the anesthesiology team, especially Mark, who was right there, steady as ever, when things got dicey. It reminded me that this work is never solo. We're a team, and every role matters. Looking back now, decades later, I still think about that night. It's one of those moments that shaped my career, my perspective, and maybe even the way I carry myself in the OR. It wasn't just about a difficult surgery, it was a lesson in humility, teamwork, and resilience. And honestly, I hope that story lives on, not just as a hospital legend, but as a real example of what it means to face the unknown with steady hands and a clear head. Because in this profession, that's what we're all called to do. So here we are, the end of this story, but not the end of the journey. If there's one thing I hope you take away from all this, it's that behind every surgery, every case, there's a very human story. Moments of fear, doubt, hope, and sometimes unexpected twists that test us beyond what we think we can handle. For those of us in medicine, it's a daily reality. But it's also a reminder for everyone watching, life doesn't come with guarantees. You can prepare, plan, and train all you want, but sometimes the unexpected happens. And how you respond to that moment defines everything. I've shared this story not because I want to be seen as some kind of hero, far from it. I'm just a man who spent his life trying to do right by his patients, his team, and the profession he loves. What I want you to think about is this. In your own life, what's the moment you faced that scared you to your core? The moment when you had to keep going, even though every part of you wanted to stop. How did you handle it? And if you're still facing that moment, what's holding you back from stepping through it? I want you to be honest with yourself and with me, because sometimes the hardest thing to admit is how afraid we really are. But admitting that, that's where real strength begins. So go ahead, leave a comment, share your story, your thoughts, your fears. Let's have a real conversation. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 35 years of surgery, it's this: we're stronger when we face the hard stuff together. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.